The lantern flickered in Garrett Sullivan's calloused hand as he climbed the worn ladder to his hayloft at 3 in the morning, drawn by a sound that had become too familiar over the past week, the soft rustle of movement where no movement should be. What he found stole the breath from his lungs. A young woman lay curled in the hay near the window that overlooked his barn, a rifle resting across her lap, her eyes fixed on the stalls below where his newborn calves slept beside their mothers. She turned at his approach, and in the amber glow of his lantern he saw eyes the color of storm clouds meeting his without fear or shame. "Evening," she said quietly, her voice carrying the dust of Texas plains. "I figured you'd find me eventually." Garrett stood frozen on the top rung of the ladder, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. The woman couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with dark hair braided down her back and wearing men's trousers beneath a faded blue shirt. Her face was smudged with dirt, but even in the dim light, he could see the delicate lines of her jaw, the determination set in her mouth. "Who are you?" he managed, climbing the rest of the way into the loft. "What are you doing in my barn?" She shifted slightly, the rifle never wavering from its position. "Name's Eleanor Byrne, and I've been guarding your calves each night. You've got coyotes circling your property, and someone's been cutting through your fence line on the eastern pasture. Figured you hadn't noticed, being as you're here alone and working yourself near to death during the day." Garrett moved closer, lowering his lantern to see her better. Now that he looked, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the dark circles under her eyes. "You've been sleeping here? How long?" "6 nights now." Eleanor's gaze drifted back to the window. "Lost 3 calves the first night I arrived in Redemption. Heard the commotion from where I was camped by the creek. By the time I got here, they'd already dragged one off. Managed to scare them away before they got the others, but I figured they'd be back. So I stayed." "Why?" The word came out harsher than he intended. "Why would a stranger risk herself for my cattle?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tightening on the rifle. "Because 7 months ago, raiders came through our ranch in Oklahoma Territory, killed my father, burned everything. I couldn't save anything that mattered then." Her voice cracked slightly. "So I save what I can now." The weight of her words settled between them like stones. Garrett had heard stories of the violence spreading through the territories in this year of 1884, of families torn apart and lives destroyed in the lawless expanse between established towns. He'd thought himself lucky to have carved out this piece of land in Texas, far enough from trouble to build something solid, but trouble, it seemed, had a way of finding everyone. "I'm sorry," he said finally, settling down onto a hay bale across from her. "About your father, about all of it." She nodded once, accepting his condolence without elaborating. They sat in silence, the only sounds the gentle lowing of cattle below and the whisper of wind through the barn's weathered boards. Garrett studied her profile, the way she held herself with a mixture of exhaustion and unwavering vigilance. He'd been alone on this ranch for 2 years now, ever since his partner had decided ranch life wasn't for him and headed back east. The solitude had suited him, or so he'd told himself. But sitting here with this strange, fierce woman who'd appointed herself guardian of his livestock, he felt something shift inside his chest. "You can't keep sleeping up here," he said. "It's November. Getting cold at night." "I'll manage." "Eleanor?" Her name felt foreign on his tongue, but right somehow. "I've got a spare room in the house. If you're set on staying, at least sleep somewhere warm." She finally turned to look at him fully, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "Why would you offer that?" "Because you saved my calves. Because you look like you haven't had a decent meal or a full night's sleep in weeks. Because—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Because it's the right thing to do." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, weighing something he couldn't name. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. "Just until the coyote problem is handled, then I'll move on." "Fair enough." Garrett stood, offering his hand. "Come on, I'll make coffee and you can tell me about this fence line problem." She took his hand, and he was struck by the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip. This was a woman who knew hard work, who'd been tested by life and hadn't broken. As they climbed down from the loft, Garrett found himself wondering about the path that had brought Eleanor Byrne to his ranch, and why the thought of her leaving after the coyotes were dealt with sat so uncomfortably in his gut. The ranch house was modest but well kept. 2 bedrooms separated by a main living area with a stone fireplace and a kitchen that smelled of coffee and leather. Garrett lit the lamps while Eleanor stood awkwardly near the door, her rifle still in hand, looking like a wild thing considering whether to bolt. "You can prop that by the door," he said gently, nodding to the rifle, "though I won't ask you to part with it if it makes you feel safer." She hesitated, then leaned the weapon against the wall within easy reach. "Old habit. Pa always said never be without a means to defend yourself." "Smart man." Garrett busied himself with the coffee pot, measuring grounds and water. "This eastern fence line. Tell me what you've seen." Eleanor moved to the table, sinking into one of the rough-hewn chairs with visible relief. "3 nights ago I did a patrol around your property. Found a section where the wire had been cut clean through, not torn like an animal would do, fresh cuts. Someone's been coming onto your land, and I'd wager it's not for friendly reasons." "Rustlers." Garrett felt anger kindle in his chest. He'd worked too hard building this herd to have someone steal from him in the night. "That'd be my guess. Haven't seen them yet, but I've been watching. The coyotes are a separate problem, natural predators drawn by easy prey. But the fence?" She shook her head. "That's human trouble, and it's usually worse." He poured 2 cups of coffee, black and strong, and set one before her. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and he felt a spark of something electric that made him pull back too quickly. If she noticed, she didn't show it, wrapping both hands around the cup and breathing in the steam. "I'll ride out at first light," Garrett said. "You check the fence myself. We can set up a watch schedule, take turns. No sense in you bearing the burden alone when it's my ranch at stake." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." He met her eyes across the table. "You've been protecting my property for a week without asking for anything in return. Least I can do is share the watch." Something softened in Eleanor's expression, a crack in the armor she wore. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'm not used to people being kind anymore." "Then they're fools." The words came out before he could stop them, raw and honest. The world needs more people willing to stand between predators and the innocent, whether those innocents are human or calf. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "That's a pretty sentiment." "It's the truth." Garrett sipped his coffee, using the pause to gather his thoughts. "How long have you been drifting?" "Since the raid. 7 months of moving from town to town, picking up work where I could. Thought about settling in Redemption, but I don't know if I remember how to stay in one place anymore." She stared into her cup. "Sometimes I think I'm running from ghosts. Other times I think I'm looking for something I lost and can't name." Garrett understood that feeling more than he cared to admit. He'd come to Texas trying to outrun his own past, the memory of a woman back in Missouri who'd chosen another man, the failure of dreams he'd once held dear. The ranch had been his salvation, hard work, and honest sweat replacing the emptiness inside him. But lately, especially in the quiet hours before dawn, he'd felt the edges of loneliness creeping back in. "Maybe you'll find it here," he said. "Maybe." Eleanor didn't sound convinced, but she didn't sound entirely dismissive either. "Tell me about your ranch. How'd you come to have this place?" So he told her. About leaving Missouri 5 years ago with nothing but his horse and saddle, about working other men's ranches until he'd saved enough to buy this land, about the first hard winter when he'd nearly lost everything to a blizzard that swept down from the north. He told her about the satisfaction of watching his herd grow, of building something with his own 2 hands that belonged to him alone. And somewhere in the telling, as the sky outside began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, he realized he was telling her things he'd never spoken aloud to anyone. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her gray eyes never leaving his face. When he finally wound down, embarrassed by how much he'd revealed, she simply nodded. "You love this place," she observed. "It's in every word you speak about it." "I do." He stood, suddenly needing to move. "It's not much, but it's mine, and I'll be damned if I'll let rustlers or coyotes take it from me." "Then we'll make sure they don't." Eleanor rose as well, setting down her empty cup. "Show me the spare room, then get a few hours' sleep. I'll take first watch today, and you can relieve me after noon. We'll ride the fence line together before sunset." It was a plan, simple and practical. But as Garrett showed her to the small bedroom off the main house, watched her test the mattress and nod approval at the window that faced the barn, he felt something profound taking root. This woman had appeared in his life like a storm, unexpected and fierce, and he had the sudden certainty that nothing would be quite the same after she left. If she left. The thought surprised him with its intensity. They'd known each other less than 2 hours, exchanged maybe a few hundred words. But standing in the doorway of that spare room, watching Eleanor run her hand over the quilt his mother had sewn years ago, Garrett felt the first stirrings of something that might become more if given the chance to grow. "Rest well," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "You too." She met his eyes, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw the same awareness reflected there. Then she closed the door, and he was left alone with his racing thoughts. Garrett didn't sleep. He lay in his own bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of his house settling around him, hyper-aware of the presence of another person under his roof. Eventually, he gave up the pretense and rose, moving quietly through his morning routine. Through the window, he could see Eleanor already up and stationed in the loft, her rifle once again resting across her lap as she kept watch over the barn. Stubborn woman. Beautiful, brave, stubborn woman. He started breakfast, frying bacon and eggs, making biscuits the way his mother had taught him. When the food was ready, he climbed up to the loft with 2 plates balanced carefully in his hands. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, settling beside her. Eleanor looked at the plate like it was a gift beyond measure. "You didn't have to do this." "Getting to be a habit. You saying that?" He handed her a fork. "Getting to be a habit. Me wanting to anyway." They ate in companionable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the Texas landscape. The land stretched out before them in rolling hills dotted with cattle, the grass still green despite the approaching winter. It was beautiful in a stark way, honest and unforgiving, the kind of place that demanded everything from those who tried to tame it. "My father used to say the land knows when you love it," Eleanor said suddenly. "Said it could tell the difference between someone just trying to squeeze profit from the soil and someone who actually cared. Looking at your ranch, I think he'd say you're the latter." "What about you?" Garrett asked. "Do you love the land?" She considered the question seriously. "I did once. Loved our ranch in Oklahoma, loved the feeling of dirt under my feet, and the smell of rain on the plains. But after Pa died, after everything burned—" She paused, swallowing hard. "I couldn't stay there, couldn't look at what we'd lost. So I left, and I've been leaving ever since." "Running or searching?" "Both. Neither. I don't know anymore." Eleanor set down her plate, drawing her knees up to her chest. "What I do know is that I'm tired. Tired of moving, tired of being alone, tired of watching my back every second, but I don't know how to stop." Garrett wanted to reach for her to offer some comfort, but he sensed she wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, he said, "Maybe you start by staying in one place long enough to remember what it feels like. No commitments, no promises, just staying." "Here?" The word was barely a whisper. "Here." His heart hammered in his chest. "At least until we deal with the rustlers and the coyotes. Could be a few weeks, could be longer. You'd earn your keep, of course. I could use help with the ranch, and you clearly know your way around cattle and trouble both." Eleanor turned to look at him, and he saw hope warring with fear in her expression. "You don't know me. I could be a terrible worker, could bring more trouble than I'm worth." "Could be, but I doubt it." He smiled. "Besides, you've already proven yourself. Not many people would spend 6 nights in a cold loft protecting someone else's livestock. That tells me what kind of person you are. And what kind is that? The kind worth knowing. The kind worth trusting. He held her gaze. The kind I'd like to have around. A blush crept up Eleanor's neck, coloring her cheeks. You're a strange man, Garrett Sullivan. I prefer honest. He stood, collecting the plates. Think about it. No pressure. But the offer stands for as long as you need it. He climbed back down before she could respond, leaving her to wrestle with the decision. Part of him wondered if he'd moved too fast, revealed too much of the loneliness that had been eating at him. But a larger part felt relief at having spoken his truth. Life was too short and too hard to waste time pretending you didn't want things, and he wanted Eleanor Byrne to stay, wanted it with a fierceness that surprised him. The day passed in a blur of chores. Garrett mucked stalls, checked on the calves Eleanor had saved, repaired a weak spot in the barn's roof. All the while he was conscious of her presence, the way she moved with efficient grace through her own tasks, feeding horses and cleaning tack she'd found in the equipment shed. They worked in parallel orbits, occasionally crossing paths, exchanging brief words and longer glances. As afternoon stretched toward evening, they saddled horses and rode out to inspect the eastern fence line. The cut wire was exactly as Eleanor had described, clean slices through 3 separate strands. Garrett examined the damage with a growing sense of unease. Professional job, he muttered. This wasn't done by someone who just wanted a quick way through. They took their time. Scouting, Eleanor said from where she sat on her horse, scanning the horizon. They're learning your property, finding weak spots. When they come back, they'll know exactly where to hit and how to get out fast. How do you know so much about this? Her expression went dark. Because it's what happened to us. The raiders who hit our ranch didn't just show up random one day. They'd been watching, learning. Pa noticed small things, supplies that went missing, signs someone had been on our land. By the time he realized what it meant, it was too late. Garrett felt cold despite the warm afternoon sun. I won't let that happen here. Then we need to be smart. Eleanor dismounted, walking along the fence line. We repair this, but we don't make it obvious. Make it look still broken from a distance. Then we set up a watch point where we can see this section without being seen. When they come back, we'll be ready. You're talking about an ambush. I'm talking about protecting what's yours. She faced him squarely. These men are thieves and probably worse. You have every right to defend your property. She was right, of course. This was Texas in 1884, where law was often whatever a man could enforce himself. The nearest sheriff was 2 days' ride away in the next county, too far to be of use in an emergency. If rustlers came, Garrett would have to handle it himself, or rather, they would handle it together. The realization settled over him with a strange sense of rightness. Somewhere between the hayloft and this moment, Eleanor had become part of this, part of him. It should have scared him. This quick attachment to a woman he barely knew. Instead, it felt inevitable, like water finding its level or the sun rising in the east. All right, he agreed. We'll do it your way. But Eleanor? Yes? If trouble comes, I need you to promise me something. Promise you'll be careful, that you won't take risks you don't have to. She tilted her head, studying him. Why do you care so much? You just met me. Because... He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound insane. Because in one night, you've made this place feel less empty. Because you're brave and good, and the world needs more of that, not less. Because I'd like the chance to know you better, and I can't do that if you get yourself shot by rustlers. Eleanor's eyes widened, vulnerability breaking through her careful control. Garrett, I don't know if I can be what you might want me to be. I'm too broken, too... Hey. He dismounted, moving to stand before her. We're all broken in our own ways. Doesn't make us worthless. Doesn't mean we don't deserve good things. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her shoulder. Just think about staying, that's all I'm asking. Give this place a chance. Give us a chance. Us, she repeated, as if testing the word. There is no us, not yet. Not yet, he agreed. But there could be, if you're willing. For a long moment they stood there in the fading light, the Texas wind moving around them like a benediction. Then Eleanor nodded, so slightly he almost missed it. I'll stay, she said. Through the winter at least. We'll deal with the rustlers and the coyotes. After that, we'll see. Relief flooded through Garrett so powerfully he felt dizzy. That's all I can ask. They worked together to make the fence look damaged while secretly reinforcing it enough to slow any cattle being driven through. By the time they rode back to the ranch, full darkness had fallen, and stars were beginning to pepper the sky. Garrett found himself hyper-aware of Eleanor riding beside him, the way moonlight caught in her dark hair, the determined set of her shoulders. Back at the house, he made dinner while she tended the horses. They fell into an easy rhythm, moving around each other in the kitchen as if they'd done this 100 times before. Over stew and fresh bread, they planned their defense strategy, mapping out watch schedules and fallback positions. But underneath the practical discussion, Garrett felt currents of something deeper running between them. Tell me about Missouri, Eleanor said, as they cleaned up after the meal. What made you leave? Garrett dried a plate slowly, considering his answer. A woman, or rather, the lack of one. I thought we had an understanding, thought we'd build a life together. Turned out she had other ideas. Chose a banker over a cowboy. Can't say I blame her. He could offer her things I never could. Like what? Security, a house in town, respectability. He shrugged. All the things that matter when you're thinking practical. And what did you offer? Dreams, hard work. A life that would never be easy but might be meaningful. He set down the plate. Guess dreams don't pay bills or keep you warm in winter. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then said softly, I think she was a fool. Yeah? Yeah. She met his eyes. Dreams are worth more than people think. They're what keep us going when everything else falls apart. And a man willing to work hard for something he believes in? A small smile touched her lips. That's rarer than gold. Warmth spread through Garrett's chest. You might be biased. Maybe. Or maybe I just recognize something real when I see it. She dried her hands on a towel. I should take first watch tonight. You've been up since before dawn. We'll both watch, he countered. From the loft. No sense wearing ourselves out when we can keep each other awake. So they climbed to the hayloft together, bringing blankets against the chill and a thermos of hot coffee. They settled near the window overlooking the barn, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and began their vigil. The hours passed slowly, marked by the distant howl of coyotes and the restless movement of cattle below. They talked in low voices, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for the future, observations about the strange paths that had brought them to this moment. Garrett learned that Eleanor's mother had died when she was young, that she'd grown up working alongside her father, learning to ride and shoot and manage a ranch. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about a brother who died of fever when they were both boys, about the weight of survivor's guilt that had driven him west. Do you ever stop missing them? Eleanor asked. The people we lose? No, Garrett said honestly, but the missing changes, gets softer around the edges. You learn to carry it without letting it crush you. I hope you're right. She leaned her head back against the wall. Some days the weight of it all feels like too much. Then share the weight. The words came out before he could censor them. That's what people do when they care about each other. They help carry the heavy things. Eleanor turned to look at him, and in the moonlight streaming through the window, her face was achingly beautiful. Is that what we're doing? Caring about each other? I think so. I know I am. His heart pounded. Eleanor, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other 2 days, but I can't shake the feeling that you appearing on my ranch wasn't random, that maybe we were meant to find each other. I don't believe in fate. Neither did I, until now. She drew in a shaky breath. I'm scared of wanting this, of wanting you, Everyone I've cared about has been taken from me. My mother, my father, our home. I don't know if I can survive losing someone else." "You won't lose me." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor. And if you'll let me, I'll spend every day proving that you can trust this. Trust me." Tears shimmered in her eyes, catching the moonlight. "What if I'm not brave enough?" "You're the bravest person I've ever met. You've survived things that would break most people. You kept moving when you could have given up. You protected my calves when you had no reason to care." He squeezed her hand gently. "That's not weakness. That's strength beyond measure." A tear slipped down her cheek, and without thinking, Garrett reached up to brush it away with his thumb. The touch seemed to break something open in Eleanor. She turned into him, burying her face against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arms around her as she cried. He held her through it, one hand stroking her back, murmuring wordless comfort. All the pain she'd been carrying alone, all the fear and grief and exhaustion poured out in those tears. When she finally quieted, she didn't pull away. Instead, she stayed there in the circle of his arms, her breath evening out against his chest. "I'll try," she whispered. "I'll try to be brave enough for this. That's all I ask." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, feeling her shiver in response. "We'll figure it out together, one day at a time." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other in blankets, keeping watch over the sleeping cattle below. And when Eleanor finally lifted her head to look at him, when she reached up to touch his face with tentative wonder, Garrett knew they'd crossed some invisible threshold. This was no longer just about protecting his ranch or giving her a place to rest. This was about two broken people finding something whole in each other. "Kiss me," Eleanor said, so softly he almost missed it. Garrett didn't need to be asked twice. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she rose to meet him halfway. Their lips touched gently at first, a question and an answer all at once. Then Eleanor made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of loneliness and longing and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they both found home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you in this loft." "Took you long enough." There was laughter in her voice, fragile but real. "Didn't want to scare you off." "I don't scare easy, Garrett Sullivan." She kissed him again, brief and sweet, "but I appreciate the consideration." They spent the rest of that night in the loft, trading kisses between long conversations, learning the shape and feel of this new thing growing between them. By the time dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer two separate people sharing space. They were partners, bound by choice and circumstance in the beginning of love. Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm that felt ancient and new all at once. They worked the ranch together during daylight hours, Eleanor proving herself as capable as any hand Garrett had ever hired. She could rope and ride, mend fence, and deliver calves. More than that, she had instincts about the animals, knowing when something was wrong before it became obvious. The cattle seemed to sense it too, responding to her with trust that usually took months to build. At night, they took turns on watch, sometimes together, sometimes alone. The coyotes came twice more, but between Eleanor's sharp eyes and Garrett's quick shooting, they managed to drive the pack off without losing any more calves. As for the rustlers, they saw no sign of them, but both remained vigilant. During the quiet moments, they continued to learn each other. Garrett discovered that Eleanor loved thunderstorms, that she could whistle any tune after hearing it once, that she had a scar on her left shoulder from a horse kick when she was 15. Eleanor learned that Garrett was left-handed, that he had a habit of talking to the cattle like they were old friends, that he'd once wanted to be a teacher but couldn't afford the schooling. "You'd be good at it," Eleanor said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Teaching, I mean. You explain things well, have patience. Maybe someday." He reached for her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the past week. Right now, I'm content where I am. Because of the ranch? Because of you. He turned to face her. Eleanor, these past days with you here, it's made me realize how much I was just going through the motions before, working to work, surviving to survive. But with you, everything feels purposeful again, like I'm building something that matters. She laced her fingers through his. I feel it too. For the first time since Pa died, I don't feel like I'm just drifting. Being here with you, working this land, it feels right in a way nothing has in months. Then stay, he said urgently, not just through winter. Stay for good. Help me build this ranch into something real. Be my partner in all of this. Eleanor's breath caught. Garrett, I know it's fast. I know we're still learning each other, but I also know what I feel, and I feel it down to my bones. He cupped her face in his hands. I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor Byrne. Maybe I already have fallen, and I want you here. Not as a hired hand or a temporary guest, but as someone who belongs, as someone who's mine and I'm theirs. Tears welled in her eyes, but she was smiling. You're sure? You're absolutely sure you want this chaos, this broken woman who barely knows how to stay in one place anymore? I've never been more sure of anything. He kissed her softly. You're not broken. You're healing. And I want to be here while you do, if you'll let me. Yes. The word came out choked with emotion. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I want this. Yes, I'm falling in love with you too. You impossible, wonderful man. They kissed on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, and Garrett felt something settle in his soul. This was right. This was meant to be. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. The rustlers came on a moonless night 2 weeks after Eleanor had agreed to stay. Garrett and Eleanor were both on watch in their carefully prepared position overlooking the eastern fence line when they heard the soft jingle of harnesses, the low murmur of men's voices. 4 riders approached through the darkness, leading empty horses meant to carry stolen cattle. Ready? Eleanor whispered, her rifle already aimed. Ready? Garrett's heart pounded, but his hands were steady. Remember, we give them a chance to turn back first. As the rustlers began cutting through the fence, Garrett called out, his voice carrying through the still night. That's far enough. You're trespassing on private property. Turn around and ride out, and we'll call it even. The men froze. Then one laughed. And if we don't? Then we've got 2 rifles aimed at you, and we won't miss. Eleanor's voice was cold as winter steel. Your choice. Leave or get carried out. For a tense moment, nothing moved. Then one of the rustlers reached for his gun, and everything exploded into chaos. Eleanor fired first, her shot pinging off a rock near the man's feet. Garrett's second shot took the hat off another rustler. The message was clear. They were shooting to warn, but they could shoot to kill if forced. The rustlers scattered, one of them returning fire wildly into the darkness. A bullet whined past Garrett's head, close enough that he felt the displacement of air. Beside him, Eleanor fired again with precision, and one of the rustlers yelped, clutching his arm. Next one doesn't miss, Garrett shouted. Get off my land! That broke them. The rustlers scrambled for their horses and fled into the night, leaving behind their cutting tools and one spooked horse. Garrett and Eleanor waited tensely for several minutes, ensuring they weren't circling back before emerging from their hiding spot. You all right? Garrett asked, checking Eleanor over for injuries. Fine. You? Fine. He pulled her into a tight embrace, adrenaline making him shake. God, when that bullet came close. I know. She held him just as tightly. But we're all right. We protected what's ours. They spent the rest of the night on high alert, but the rustlers didn't return. As dawn broke, they examined the scene, finding blood where Eleanor had winged one of the men. Garrett collected the abandoned horse and tools as evidence, then rode to the neighboring ranch to spread word about the attempted theft. News of their successful defense spread quickly through the region. Other ranchers stopped by over the following days, some offering congratulations, others seeking advice on protecting their own property. Eleanor handled them all with calm competence, her natural authority earning respect from men who might otherwise have dismissed a woman's opinions. Garrett watched her with pride, seeing how she blossomed when given trust and responsibility. As winter settled in earnest over Texas, bringing cold nights and occasional frost, Garrett and Eleanor grew closer still. They worked together seamlessly now, anticipating each other's needs and movements. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Eleanor reading aloud from books while Garrett worked on leather repairs or simply talking about their plans for the ranch's future. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said one night as they lay in bed together. She'd moved into his room a week after the rustler attack, both of them tired of pretending they didn't want to be together. "About expanding the herd come spring. If we're careful with breeding and buy a few more cows from the Hendersons, we could double our size in 2 years. Garrett smiled in the darkness, loving how she said "we" now without hesitation. "I like the way you think, though we'd need more grazing land. There's that parcel to the south that's been sitting empty. Old widow named Mrs. Chen owns it, but I heard she's thinking of selling since she moved to San Antonio to live with her daughter. If we could negotiate a fair price, we'd have room to grow." He pulled her closer. "You've got a head for this, Eleanor. For planning and seeing the big picture. Had a good teacher in my father." Her voice went soft with memory. "He always said a ranch is like a living thing. You have to think about what it needs not just today, but next year and the year after. Thinking long-term means you're planning to stay, to invest in the future. Is that what you're doing? Investing in the future here?" "Our future," she corrected, turning to face him in the dark. "Garrett, I want to build a life with you, a real life. Not just working the ranch, but everything that comes with it. A home, a family maybe someday." His heart felt too large for his chest. "You mean that?" "Every word." She kissed him tenderly. "I love you. I think I started loving you the moment you offered me that cup of coffee and didn't ask for anything in return. And it's only grown since then. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever, the ability to hope." "I love you too," Garrett said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I knew I could love anyone. Eleanor, I want to marry you. Want to make this official in every way that matters. Will you be my wife?" She went very still. "Are you proposing?" "I am. I know I don't have a ring yet. Know I should probably do this somewhere more romantic than in bed, but I can't wait another moment. Marry me, Eleanor. Let's build this life together properly." "Yes." She laughed, the sound bright with joy. "Yes, absolutely yes, I'll marry you, Garrett Sullivan." They sealed the promise with kisses that turned heated, celebrating their engagement in the most intimate way possible. Later, wrapped in each other's arms, Garrett felt a peace he'd never known. His life, which had seemed so empty just a month ago, was now full of possibility. They married on a clear day in January in a simple ceremony at the church in Redemption. The neighboring ranchers attended, along with several townspeople who'd come to respect Eleanor's fierce independence and good heart. She wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Henderson, simple but elegant, with her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Garrett wore his best suit, the one he'd brought from Missouri and never thought he'd need. Standing before the minister, exchanging vows that promised forever, Garrett felt the weight of rightness. This woman, this fierce guardian, who'd appeared in his hayloft guarding his calves, was now his wife, his partner in all things. The thought staggered him with its perfection. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said, and Garrett did thoroughly, to the whoops and hollers of their guests. The celebration afterward was modest but warm, with food and music and genuine happiness. Eleanor danced with Garrett in the town square, laughing as he spun her around, her eyes shining with a joy that erased the last shadows of grief he'd seen there. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close. "Impossibly so." She rested her head against his chest. Thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing past the broken parts to something worth keeping. You were always worth keeping. I just helped you remember that. He kissed her forehead. And you did the same for me. We saved each other, Eleanor. Mrs. Sullivan now, she corrected with a grin. Mrs. Sullivan, he agreed, loving the sound of it. My wife, my love, my home. They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, ready to begin their life together in earnest. The calves Eleanor had guarded that first night were growing strong and healthy, and the herd was thriving. The rustlers had spread word that this ranch was defended, and no one had tried their luck since. The coyotes had moved on to easier prey. Everything they'd fought to protect was safe. But more than that, they'd found something neither had been looking for, a love that healed old wounds and made them both braver than they'd been alone. As they settled into married life, working side by side each day and falling asleep tangled together each night, both Garrett and Eleanor knew they'd been given a gift. Spring came with a burst of wildflowers across the Texas plains and the birth of several new calves. Eleanor proved herself invaluable during calving season, her gentle hands and patient nature helping several difficult births. They successfully purchased the southern parcel from Mrs. Chen, expanding their grazing land as planned. The ranch grew and thrived under their combined care. In late summer, Eleanor began to show signs of sickness in the mornings. At first, Garrett worried she'd caught some illness, but Eleanor had a different suspicion. A visit to the doctor in town confirmed it. She was pregnant, due to give birth the following spring. Garrett's reaction was everything Eleanor could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around right there in the doctor's office, laughing with pure delight. That night, lying in bed with his hand spread protectively over her still flat belly, he made plans aloud about the future. We'll need to build another room onto the house, he said, and maybe a proper schoolroom eventually. I could teach our children myself, the way I'd once wanted to teach. Our children? Eleanor smiled, awfully confident there'll be more than one. With you as their mother? I hope there are half a dozen. He kissed her deeply. Though we'll let you recover between each one. I'm ambitious, not cruel. Eleanor laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. A year ago, she'd been drifting and alone, convinced she'd lost everything worth having. Now she had a home, a husband she adored, a ranch she was helping build, and a baby on the way. Life had a strange way of surprising you when you least expected it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Eleanor continued working the ranch as long as she could, only slowing down in the final months when her belly grew too large to sit a horse comfortably. Garrett took on the heavier work without complaint, treating her like precious glass despite her protests that she wasn't fragile. You're carrying our child, he'd say whenever she argued. That makes you the most precious thing in my world. Let me take care of you. How could she argue with that? Their son was born on a warm March morning in 1886, coming into the world with a healthy cry that announced his displeasure at the disruption. They named him Thomas, after Eleanor's father, and from the moment Garrett held his son for the first time, Eleanor knew their family was complete, or rather, on its way to being complete. As they'd hoped, more children followed in the years after. A daughter they named Rose came 2 years after Thomas, followed by another son, James, 2 years after that. Each pregnancy was celebrated, each birth welcomed with joy. Their house expanded to accommodate the growing family, adding rooms and eventually that schoolroom Garrett had dreamed of. The ranch expanded too. As their children grew old enough to help with chores, the Sullivan family became known throughout the region for their fine cattle and fair dealing. Eleanor proved herself not just as a rancher, but as a mother who raised her children with the same fierce protectiveness she'd once shown guarding Garrett's newborn calves. She taught them to ride and shoot, to be honest and brave, to stand up for what was right even when it was hard. Garrett, true to his early dream, educated their children himself, teaching them reading and arithmetic and history in the schoolroom he'd built. But more than academics, he taught them about integrity and hard work, about treating the land with respect and people with kindness. Together, he and Eleanor created not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of strength and love. On their 10th anniversary, Garrett led Eleanor back to the hayloft where they'd first truly talked, where she'd admitted to guarding his calves. They climbed up with a blanket and a bottle of wine, settling into the spot where everything had begun. "Do you remember that night?" Garrett asked, pulling her close. "When I found you up here with your rifle, looking like some kind of fierce angel? I remember thinking you were either very brave or very stupid, climbing up here when you didn't know if I'd shoot." Eleanor smiled at the memory. "I also remember thinking you had kind eyes." "Kind eyes, huh? That's what won you over?" "That and the coffee." She laughed. "And the way you looked at me like I was someone worth saving instead of a problem to solve." "You saved yourself," Garrett corrected. "I just gave you a place to land." "We saved each other." She kissed him softly. "Best decision I ever made staying here. Best thing that ever happened to me, loving you." "Second best," Garrett countered. Garrett, nodding toward the house where their 3 children were supposedly sleeping under their grandmother's watchful eye. His mother had come from Missouri the previous year and decided to stay. "Those 3 are pretty spectacular." "They are," Eleanor agreed. "We made a good life, didn't we? Despite everything, despite all the pain and loss that came before, we built something beautiful." "We did, and we're not done yet." He stood, pulling her up with him. "I've got plans for the next 10 years, Mrs. Sullivan. Hope you're ready for more adventures." "With you?" "Always." They climbed down from the loft, hand in hand, and walked back to their house under a sky full of stars. Inside, their children slept peacefully, and the life they'd built together hummed with contentment. The ranch spread out around them, healthy and thriving, a testament to hard work and mutual devotion. Eleanor paused at the door, looking back at the barn where everything had started. So much had changed since that first night when she'd climbed into the hayloft to protect a stranger's calves. She'd been running then, lost and grieving, convinced she'd never feel whole again. But this place, this man, this life, they'd healed her in ways she'd never imagined possible. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had brought her to Garrett's ranch that desperate night. Garrett squeezed her hand. "What are you thanking?" "Everything. The coyotes that drew me here. The cold that made me stay. Your kindness, your love." She turned to face him. "All of it. Every moment that led to this." "Then I'll thank it too." He kissed her forehead. "Because loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life." They went inside together, closing the door on the Texas night, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. The ranch would continue to grow, their children would grow up strong and capable, and their love would remain the foundation on which everything else was built. Years later, when they were old and gray, sitting on that same porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Eleanor would think back to that first night in the hayloft. She'd been so alone then, so convinced that protection and vigilance were the only purposes left to her. She'd never imagined that guarding those calves would lead to guarding a heart, to building a family, to finding a home in every sense of the word. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett would ask, his hand still seeking hers after decades of marriage. "The calves," she'd answer with a smile. "And how lucky I am that you had newborns that needed protecting." "I'm the lucky one," he'd counter. "You appeared like a miracle when I needed you most, even though I didn't know I needed you." And they'd sit there together, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light, grateful for every moment, every choice, every risk that had led them to each other. The Sullivan Ranch would pass to their children and then to their children's children, but the story of how it began, with a fierce woman guarding calves in a hayloft and a lonely cowboy brave enough to offer her shelter, that story would be told around family tables for generations, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected beginnings. Their love story became legend in that part of Texas, the tale of the guardian angel in the hayloft who'd protected the calves and captured the rancher's heart. Young couples would cite them as proof that real love existed, that broken people could heal and thrive when they found the right partner. And Eleanor and Garrett, living out their days surrounded by the fruits of their labor and love, knew that every word of the legend was true. They'd started as strangers in a hayloft, two damaged souls seeking purpose. They'd become partners, lovers, spouses, parents, and finally two halves of one enduring whole. The ranch they'd built together stood as testament to what could be achieved when two people chose each other every single day, through hardship and triumph alike. On Garrett's last day, decades after that first meeting, he would lie in their bed holding Eleanor's hand, looking at her with the same wonder he'd felt that first night. "Best life I could have imagined," he'd whisper. "Best life I could have lived," she'd whisper back. And when Eleanor followed him a few months later, their children would bury them side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they'd loved and the legacy they'd created together. The headstone would read simply, "Garrett and Eleanor Sullivan, partners in life, love, and all adventures." But long before that end, in the vibrant middle of their story, they lived fully. They raised their children with wisdom and love, expanded the ranch beyond their initial dreams, hosted summer barbecues that brought the whole community together, and loved each other with a passion that never dimmed. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but they always resolved their differences with honest communication and mutual respect. They taught their children that love wasn't just a feeling, but a choice made daily, a commitment honored through action. Thomas grew up to take over the ranch, managing it with the same blend of Eleanor's fierceness and Garrett's kindness. Rose became a teacher, spreading education through the region the way her father had once dreamed of doing. James became a veterinarian, his childhood love of animals developing into a career that served ranchers throughout Texas. All three children married for love, having learned from their parents' example that partnership built on respect and genuine affection was the foundation of happiness. They gave Garrett and Eleanor numerous grandchildren, who would spend summers on the ranch learning to ride and rope and appreciate the land. During those summer visits, the grandchildren would beg for stories, and Eleanor would tell them about the first night she met their grandfather, about guarding the calves and being discovered in the hayloft. Garrett would add his perspective, how he'd climbed that ladder expecting to find an intruder, and instead found his future. The children would listen with wide eyes, unable to imagine their grandparents as young and uncertain, but loving the story nonetheless. "And you really fell in love that fast?" one of the older grandchildren asked skeptically. "Faster," Garrett confirmed. "From the moment I saw her in that lamplight, I knew she was someone extraordinary." "But real love takes time," the grandchild protested. "Real love takes courage," Eleanor corrected gently. "Time helps, certainly, but what matters is being brave enough to choose someone and keep choosing them, day after day, year after year. That's what builds a life together." Those lessons, spoken on warm evenings with the scent of honeysuckle in the air, would shape the grandchildren just as Garrett and Eleanor had shaped their own children. The values of the Sullivan family, hard work, integrity, fierce loyalty, and brave love, would ripple out through generations. The ranch itself became a touchstone for the family, a place where they all gathered for holidays and celebrations. The house that had started as a modest two-bedroom dwelling grew into a sprawling home with multiple wings and additions, each one marking another chapter in the family's growth. But the original rooms remained carefully preserved, including the hayloft where Eleanor had first kept watch. Sometimes, when the house was full of family and noise, Garrett and Eleanor would slip away to that loft, climbing the ladder with more difficulty as their bodies aged, but the same determination that had always characterized them. They'd sit in their old spot looking down at the barn that held a dozen horses now instead of the original few, at the land that stretched for miles in every direction, and they'd remember. Remember the fear and the hope, the uncertainty and the trust. Remember the first kiss and the first declaration of love. Remember the wedding and the births and the countless small moments that had woven together into a life neither could have predicted but both were grateful for. Do you ever regret it? Garrett asked during one such visit to the loft when they were both in their 70s. Staying here instead of moving on? Not once, Eleanor answered firmly. This is where I was meant to be. You are who I was meant to find. Everything that came before was just the path leading me here. Even the pain? Even losing your father and your first home? She was quiet for a moment, considering. The pain shaped me into someone who could appreciate what we built. Someone who knew the value of home because I'd lost one. So yes, even the pain. It all mattered. It all brought me to you. Garrett pulled her close, marveling that after all these years, holding her still felt like coming home. I love you, Eleanor Sullivan. More now than I did that first night, and I loved you pretty fiercely even then. I love you too. She rested against him, comfortable and content. My cowboy, my partner, my home. They sat there as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something that would last far beyond their own lives. The calves Eleanor had guarded that first night had long since grown and been sold or bred, their offspring and offspring's offspring now populating the ranch. But the spirit of protection and devotion that had driven her to that loft remained, woven into the very fabric of the Sullivan family. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge, Garrett and Eleanor finally climbed down from the loft and walked back to the house, where their children and grandchildren waited with dinner and laughter. They took their places at the head of the long table, surrounded by the family they'd created, and Eleanor felt overwhelming gratitude wash over her. She'd come to this ranch as a broken wanderer, guarding calves because she hadn't been able to save her own family. But in protecting those animals, she'd found her way to a man who saw past her damage to the strength beneath. Together, they'd built not just a ranch, but a dynasty of love, a family that would continue their legacy long after they were gone. The guardian angel of the Hayloft had found her home. The lonely cowboy had found his partner. And from that unexpected beginning had grown something beautiful and enduring, a love story for the ages, set against the wild landscape of Texas and written in acts of daily devotion. Their happily ever after wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a beginning that led to 50 years of shared life, challenges overcome together, joys multiplied by being shared, and a love that grew deeper with every passing season. It was real and messy and perfect, filled with ordinary moments that became extraordinary because they were experienced together. And every night for the rest of their lives, whether they were young newlyweds or aging grandparents, when Garrett and Eleanor lay down to sleep, they'd reach for each other in the darkness. Two people who'd found each other in a hayloft on a Texas ranch, who'd chosen love over fear, who'd built something lasting from the ashes of what came before. The calves that brought them together became a metaphor their family would return to again and again. The idea that sometimes we're called to protect something small and vulnerable, and in doing so, we find ourselves protected in return. Eleanor had guarded those newborn animals, and Garrett had guarded her heart. Together, they'd created a safe haven not just for cattle, but for love itself to grow and thrive. As the years rolled by and their story became family lore, one thing remained constant. The barn still stood, the loft still held hay, and sometimes late at night, if you listened carefully, you might hear the echo of a young woman's vigilant watch and a cowboy's tender question, "What are you doing in my barn?" And the answer that changed everything, guarding your calves. From that simple exchange came a lifetime of love, a family that spanned generations, and a ranch that stood as monument to what two people could build when they found each other at exactly the right moment. The Sullivan legacy lived on, rooted in the Texas soil and reaching toward the endless sky, forever marked by the night a fierce guardian angel climbed into a hayloft and stole a lonely cowboy's heart.